From the summer of 1971 onwards, Mao supporters from Europe are the first to get a visa to enter the People's Republic for socialist friendship visits.
And then you arrive so late at night into Peking Airport, and I remember a giant white Mao statue looming there. Yes, all lit up and so on. And it was like the entrance to paradise. Yes, so you arrive and now you're looking at this huge country.
Western visitors are greeted by large propagandist signs depicting the achievements of the Cultural Revolution.
And then they started to guide us around. We were brought into the Great Hall of the People, an unbelievable privilege. That was our arrival in China. We sang the Internationale, our fists lifted. We were moved to tears. It was very emotional. We were groupies in China. An absolute joy.
Danielle Palot has a 16mm camera in her bag to film for her comrades at home.
The people's communes and the farmers at work, the great building projects, the factories, we'd never seen anything like it. Foundries where the sparks were flying, and the speeches that went along with them.
Overland, Peking, across country. Stopovers were all the same.
At the schools, one small, chubby-faced revolutionary from the Red Guards came out to tell us a wild tale about the headmaster, and we enjoyed all these things enormously.
Now, so the message went, we have Mao to thank for the fact that everything is more productive than ever before.
I remember a conversation with professors and students. Afterwards, a student came up to me and said he had to explain it again. He said the professors were still a little conservative, so to speak, so you shouldn't hold it against them. But as students, they would really want to change everything much more radically. And you had the impression that you were welcomed as a sympathetic observer of a great social experiment.
The fact that they came to visit, I think, reinforced our general faith that China was a place of world pilgrimage. But on the other hand, if you talk to these foreign believers who had come to admire the cradle of the Chinese Revolution or wherever it was that you met them, then you had a sort of, a suspicion of, you felt they were rather innocent.
The visitors' journeys are planned meticulously to prevent them from going out and exploring on their own.
Of course, we didn't see the horror. We didn't see how people were punished, flogged and executed. But rather, it was like a journey through the Peking Review, complete with illustrations. And you saw these pictures and we trawled through the images and we found it to be exactly as we had imagined. I mean, we didn't want to see it any differently. We wanted to get confirmation that it was good.
I came back with a feeling of, well, if the Chinese are managing to do that, we can do it too.
Danielle Palot stays in the country with her women's group for almost 2 months. They spend a week in Shanghai. Danielle Palot wants to film the everyday lives of people in revolutionary China for her comrades in Europe. The Chinese tour guides have selected a suitable place.
We went to a market there. In the middle of the hustle and bustle of people, there were live fish in bags, vegetables, meat and poultry. Everything was there and we filmed it. It was a dream. Afterwards, we went back to the hotel.
But she left one of her exposed films at the market. The next morning, she went back to look for it.
As we arrived back at the market, everything had gone. There wasn't anybody there. It was completely empty. You couldn't even buy a carrot, no vegetables, nothing. It was totally empty.
This is the reality of Mao's state. The chaos and failings of the Cultural Revolution have driven China to the brink of ruin. People have to queue up for hours even for their basic essentials, and millions of so-called class enemies are still sitting in dungeons, including Paul Crook's parents in Peking. In the early 70s, he and his brothers have to struggle along on their own. Sometimes an adventure presents itself.
I've climbed up there before, up to the second level. The pagoda is quite wide.
So how did you get up there?
On the lightning conductor.
Didn't anybody stop you?
It was during the Cultural Revolution. Nobody was concerned. They were all out starting a revolution.
So you were just wandering around there and playing about?
Yes, it was fun. Nowadays, nobody believes us until they see a photograph of it. Then they do.
Although Paul's parents have been in prison for years now, they have never lost their faith in Mao.
I think my father, during his time in prison, was in this state of mind where he believed that Mao was either misled or didn't know about what was going on, and if he did, then surely things would be put right.
Paul Crook and his brothers didn't know exactly where their parents were held at the time.
Then one day I was cycling to my German class at Peking University with my teacher, and I looked up, and at that window up there, on the second window on the third level, there was my mother waving at me behind bars. So I waved back, but then I thought, I can't keep my German teacher waiting, and I continued on, and I was able to say to my teacher, ich habe meine Mutter gesehen, and I was quite proud of myself. But I felt obligation not to skip a lesson.
After the first shock, the brothers later managed to secretly sneak into their mother's cell and speak to her.
She was locked up under supervision with a couple of young teachers, constantly in the same room with her, in case maybe, she thinks they were worried she might kill herself or do some other harm, so supervised very closely.
The lives of Paul Crook and his parents hang in the balance, as is the case for millions of Chinese people. Countless people are locked away. Many of Paul's peers are still in the countryside or working in factories. Most universities are still closed.
For me, living in China was very hard. Wherever I went, everybody looked at me. I always had to be exemplary, a good girl. And I had no freedom, none at all. And then I told my parents I wanted to go to Austria.
But Gudrun is stateless. She doesn't have a passport. She is sent to work in a textile factory and is not allowed to leave China.
Life is unpredictable. And in my father's case, he was a respected foreign friend one day, and next day he had been arrested. But then he came out and then he was exonerated. He eventually spent 5 years in prison in solitary confinement. We didn't even get to visit him for the first 3 or 4 years.
Paul's mother is not freed either until the beginning of the 1970s. Only then is the family reunited. Despite their political persecution, Paul's parents don't want to leave communist China.
For my parents, you know, they were revolutionaries for a world revolution, you know, so they happened to be in China, but they would certainly have wanted us to carry on the great ideal wherever we were, and that was not you know, they didn't feel that we had to stay in China. I wanted to go and see the world for myself, and for me, I think I wanted not to have to behave according to other, you know, strict guidelines, and I believed I would be a lot freer if I went to the West.
Paul says goodbye to his family at the station in Peking.
Before I left, my father said to me, "In the West, there are so many criminals, beggars. If it doesn't work out, come back right away."
Chinese newspapers also report terrible conditions in Europe. Capitalism is right on the edge of collapse.
Then I spoke to my mother and she said, "I came from Austria. I never saw those beggars." It's just propaganda. Don't listen to it.
Gudrun is filled with doubt and says goodbye to her family as she sets out on her long journey to Austria.
It was around 11 days by train. First to the Chinese-Soviet border. On the Chinese side, I only saw Chinese people. After the border, everyone was European, Russians, and me, even the conductors. Everyone's so big and fat and so loud. So interesting for me, my mouth wide open, their big eyes, just like the way the Chinese looked at me.
In February 1972, Gudrun Alba arrives in Vienna. The city celebrates her homecoming from the Eastern Bloc. As a welcome gift, she receives a camera. Paul Crook leaves China for the south.
I crossed the border from Guangzhou by train to Hong Kong. The world was such an exciting place. So I spent 10 days going to late-night cinemas, which I discovered were showing all kinds of Western, you know, Hollywood or whatever films that I'd never seen.
Then I was young. Everything was new, everything was different. And I felt free. Nobody looked at me. I looked just like the others.
On arriving in Vienna, Gudrun Alba soon meets a young student who catches her attention.
There was a spark. He was good-looking. My heart was pounding. He asked where I came from, and I said, "Well, have a guess." And he guessed at every European country, and then America, South America. And I kept saying, "No, no, every country." And finally he said, "Hong Kong." And then I said, "Really, really close."
Then when she said she came from China, it was like an epiphany. Me with my thoughts, my communist, Maoist thoughts, and she comes from China. Now she can surely tell me a lot about the system, and it'll confirm what I have in my head already, so to speak.
At this point, Sebastian Alba is a staunch Maoist student.
He said, "I don't understand why you came to Austria. China's so good." Then I said, "Well then, pack your bag. Go there. You'll be locked up by the second day."
Only after Sebastian Alba renounces Maoism do he and Gudrun get married.
She explained to me the full truth of what she had experienced, how it is in China, and that was really sobering for me.
Mao dies in 1976. The masses gather for one last time for the great leader. With this, the nightmare of the Cultural Revolution also comes to an end. Millions were politically persecuted. Mao's rival Liu Shaoqi died in prison. Up to 1.5 million people in total lost their lives. Today, the legacy of the Cultural Revolution still weighs heavily on China. Maoists in the West also had to relinquish their idea of a Chinese utopia. As a leading Green Party politician, Reinhard Bütikofer turned to Realpolitik.
After the Cultural Revolution ended, and even before its formal end, I could no longer ignore the fact that much of what I had seen had been superficial, or blindness, or wishful thinking.
I worked out that it took me just about as long to free myself from this rubbish as it had been while I was in it. I was in it for 4 years, and it took me around 4 years to stabilize myself somewhat, to find myself again. So all in all, this red decade was a real loss. It gave me nothing.
For the first time in decades, Danielle Palot is looking at the journals of her trip to China in 1971. Of crucial importance are the ones about the fake market in Shanghai.
I feel disheartened. I don't want to work on this film anymore. I've completely given up. I don't understand anything anymore. I don't understand anything. I want to break everything off. Please stop. It must be the same as it is for a child who learns that Father Christmas isn't real. You believe in Father Christmas, and then, just like that, he's not real. That was the shock for me, at that very moment in Shanghai, that there was no hope of finding the perfect society, that there was nothing that we could take back to France.
In China, the Communist Party from back then is still in power. Paul's family are no longer persecuted. Quite the opposite. Paul has accepted an invitation to go to the province and represent his mother.
I brought some words of greeting from my mother, which I will read out for you now.
Kind of a Kafkaesque experience. If it's too much to take to absorb it as horror, you mitigate it by a sense of the incredibly unbelievable, call it comedy, call it satire, call it whatever, you know. And it's one way of dealing with it. And I think that's one way that I was dealing with it, was to mitigate it with a sideways look at reality. 邯郸学院和这个十里店村合作的这个啊。
Today, Danielle Palot is living in Paris. She has never given up on the search for ways to create a better world. Most recently, she has been inspired by the alternative Nuit Debout movement. Young French people who gather every evening at the Place de la République and discuss globalization and social justice.
It was really interesting because it reminded me of the early days of the 1968 movement. These are people who live in the modern world and question the system.
She has given up her illusions.
They are completely different. It's another world. They don't believe in Mao or in any revolution. We wanted to overturn the existing society. The people here want to improve this society and make it more humane.